Back inside her cabin, Alice stripped off her bathing suit and slipped into a robe. Steve still hadn't returned from town. So far, he'd spent the whole day running in every direction at once. He seemed more concerned with how things were going for the camp than with how things were going for them. "Give me a week," he'd said. She wondered if a week would actually change anything. What could happen in a week? Well, maybe a lot could happen in a week if they really had a chance to talk. But then they'd had a chance to talk last night, and nothing had been settled. She looked around at the cabin, figuring she could take it for another week. It really wasn't all that bad, but she could think of lots of places she'd rather be. Maybe even California, but there were problems there as well. 2 men in her life, both nice men, but both with their own agendas to consider. Neither of them was willing to give up his own interest for hers, but each expected her to give up her interest for his sake. She wondered if she wouldn't be better off forgetting about both of them. But it wasn't all that easy. Nice men were hard to find, and relationships were complicated. She cared about them both. John and Steve were waiting for her to make a choice. The problem was she didn't know how to choose. She brushed her hair and went over to the dresser, taking out some fresh underwear, a t-shirt, and a clean pair of jeans. The trouble was, she wasn't sure what she really wanted. She didn't like the pressure. She couldn't think straight. Only one thing was clear. She wasn't about to settle down in the town of Crystal Lake. When Steve had spoken to her about the camp, he had talked about it as a piece of property he had inherited, an investment, not as a business he actually planned to run himself. Nor did she expect to find herself drawn into it. She subsequently realized that Camp Crystal Lake was an albatross around Steve's neck. Somehow, he seemed to feel that it was something he had to atone for. The camp had been his father's downfall. It had ruined him. There had been problems. She knew that a little boy had died. Steve didn't like to talk about it. He wouldn't elaborate. And the following year something terrible had happened. An accident, Steve said. But the talk in town didn't sound as if whatever happened had been an accident. Why did they call the place Camp Blood? One of the other kids, Ned? Or was it Bill, had mentioned some killings that had occurred here? She wanted to ask Steve about it, but he was very sensitive about the subject. She knew the moment she brought it up, he'd overreact. She thought it would probably help to talk about it, but it was an extremely sore subject with him. She sighed. How can you hope to have a relationship with someone who avoids things? You can't solve problems by pretending they aren't there, and the camp was a real problem with Steve. He was obsessed with making it a success. If he devoted as much energy to their relationship, maybe she wouldn't be thinking of going back to California. Part of her wanted to leave and just be by herself for a while, to think things out, and part of her kept hoping he'd give her more of a reason to stay. As she shut the drawer, she felt something smooth brush by her foot. She jerked it back and looked down to see a large black snake slithering underneath the dresser. She jumped back and screamed, "Bill!" Bill was just outside the cabin, clearing away some brush with a machete. When he heard Alice scream, he took off toward her cabin at a run. "Bill, come here! Quick! Hurry!" He came running through the door holding the machete. "What is it?" "There's a snake over there," she shrieked, backing against the door. "Where?" She pointed at the dresser. "What do I do?" he said. "Kill it!" He glanced uneasily toward the dresser, but he couldn't see the snake. "It might bite," he said, uneasily holding the machete out before him. "Haven't you ever been in the woods?" said Alice. "We're not in the woods." Jack burst in, startled by the screams. He was carrying a shovel. Marcy was right on his heels. Jack stopped when he saw Bill poised with the machete. "Jesus, Bill, what are you doing?" Ned and Brenda rushed in, breathless. "What is it?" Ned asked. "There's a snake in here," warned Bill, crouching and looking all around, as if expecting it to come charging at him. He knew snakes could move very quickly. "Why are we in here?" Marcy said. Alice screamed and pointed as she spotted the snake slithering under the bed. "There it is!" "Whoa!" shouted Ned, seeing the size of it. "Feet, don't fail me now." "I can't sleep with the snake in here," said Alice. Bill jumped on the bed, holding the machete up high, but he lost sight of the snake. "Nobody told us anything about snakes," said Brenda fearfully. "Kill it," Alice said, holding on to Ned's arm. "You heard the lady," Ned said. "I can't get it until it comes out," said Bill, looking cautiously beneath the bed. "Well, call him," Alice said. Bill gave her a wry look. "How do you call a snake?" Jack held up the shovel and worked his way around the bed. "I'll flush it out!" He brought the shovel down and thrust it under the bed, then jumped back, dropping the shovel and knocking over the nightstand. The girls screamed. They saw the snake's tail disappearing beneath the fallen nightstand, and both Jack and Bill jumped back, like reluctant hunters stalking a dangerous prey. Brenda screamed out and clutched Marcy as the snake shot out from the nightstand and wiggled back toward the dresser. Jack swung a pillow at it, and the feathers flew as the seams on the pillow split. Bill hacked at the floor with his machete. "I got it! I got it! Kill it! I got him!" Thwack! The machete thunked onto the floor, chopping the head off the snake. Bill brought it down twice more for good measure. "Is it dead?" whispered Alice, swallowing hard. "Either that or it's got a very short clone," said Ned. Alice made a sound of disgust. "Well," sighed Marcy, "at least we know what's for dinner." "Oh!" Brenda moaned with disgust, picking up a pillow and swinging it hard at Marcy's head as the girl ducked. "Marcy!" said Alice. "How gross!" said Ned. Bill picked up the pieces of the snake with his machete and threw them out the door into the bushes. The girl who'd been hired to cook still hadn't arrived, so they were left to their own devices for supper. Steve Christie still hadn't returned. Alice reminded them that he'd said he'd be back sometime that evening, so they decided not to wait for him. They trooped into the kitchen to check out the supplies. Brenda found some greens in the refrigerator. "I'm making salad," she announced. "Do you want me to go ahead and make some for everybody?" "That'd be great," said Marcy. They had all worked up an appetite, and nobody felt like sandwiches and chips again. "Oh, and I think there's some hamburger in there, too." "None for me, thank you," said Brenda, who was a vegetarian. She made a face at the thought of eating red meat. "There are some apples, though. You know how to make apple pie?" "Oh, sure," Marcy said. "No sweat." They heard the rumbling sound of a big motorcycle approaching. Brenda glanced out the window. "Uh-oh," she said. "Look who's coming." They went outside and watched Officer Dorf pulling up on his big Harley, having a little trouble steering it over the rutted dirt road. He looked like authority incarnate, in his freshly pressed and sharply creased uniform, his spit-shine riding boots, his police helmet, leather gauntlets, and mirrored shades. He pulled up to the front of the cabin and dismounted, leaning the big Harley on its side stand and looking them over as only a cop looks people over, as potential perpetrators. Ned chose that unfortunate moment to be Ned. He bounded out from behind the cabin, shirtless and wearing an Indian headdress he had found among the camp supplies, part of a box full of Indian headbands, beads, and vests Steve had planned to use for teaching the campers Indian dances. Whooping like Crazy Horse descending upon Custer, Ned came out prancing, doing his version of a rain dance, which looked like something halfway between a man walking barefoot on hot rocks and Michael Jackson on catnip. Intent upon his performance, he didn't notice Dorf until he pranced right up to him and found himself staring at his own reflection in Dorf's mirrored shades. He came to a dead halt and gulped. Oh shit. Dorf took off his shades with a dramatic flourish. All right, he said, giving Ned a strange look. Who are you people?
Camp counselors, said Brenda. Nettie's just fooling around.
Yeah, right, Ned added quickly. I'm just fooling around. Can it, Cochise, said Dorf. Steve Christie hire you people?
That's right,
Brenda replied. He pay you for this? Brenda nodded. No, we're doing this for free, you dork, she thought. Jack came walking over to the Harley, checking it out. Hey, nice bike. Dorf put his hands out, stopping Jack before he could get any closer. Dorf didn't like people touching his motorcycle. He used to have a sticker on the gas tank that said, "If you value your life as much as I value this bike, don't mess with it." But the sheriff made him take it off. The sheriff was always making him take things off his bike. Once, Dorf had bought a special leather shotgun case that strapped to the front forks, and he had slipped a riot gun into it, but the sheriff made him take that off as well. "You're not a rooster, Cogburn, Dorf," the sheriff had said, with a world-weary tone. "You're a police officer. You're supposed to patrol the town on that thing and write up speeders, not chase down stagecoach robbers." Dorf didn't think the sheriff understood about projecting authority. Not only did the sheriff never shine his boots, he didn't even wear regulation police boots. He wore Red Wing work shoes, the oiled leather kind that didn't take a shine. One time Dorf had heard about a special charity program in New York that bought bulletproof vests for the police, and he had used department stationery to apply for 4 vests for the Crystal Lake police force. The sheriff had returned them with a letter of apology. "I don't really think we need them, Dorf," he had said. "Cassidy and Sundance haven't been through here in years." Dorf was often frustrated in this manner, when all he was trying to do was bring some snap and polish to the force. He knew that a strong police presence was essential to crime prevention, and he knew it worked. There hadn't been much crime at all in Crystal Lake since he had joined the force 2 years ago. There hadn't been much crime in Crystal Lake before he joined the force either, but that was hardly the point. He fixed Jack with a hard stare. "You been smoking, boy?" "Smoking?" Jack said, raising his eyebrows. He grinned. "Don't smoke. It causes cancer. You know what I mean." Dorf squinted at him. He thought it made him look mean. Instead, it just made him look nearsighted. "What? Did you just get off a spaceship or something?" "Colombian gold, man. Grass, hash, the weed. Dig it?" Ned glanced at Brenda. "What's he talking about?" "Hey, don't get smart," snapped Dorf. "Me?" Ned asked innocently. "I'm as dumb as they come." "Hey," said Dorf, pointing at him. "Not another word out of you, you understand?"
"Officer,"
Marcy started.
"Officer, really,"
Brenda said at the same time.
"There's nothing going on here. We're just trying to get the place in shape."
"In shape for what?" said Dorf. Brenda rolled her eyes. Bill approached him, speaking politely. "Officer, Is there anything that we can do to help?"
"We'd be glad to help out,"
said Marcy. Dorf glanced at them all suspiciously. "I'm looking for somebody." "Yeah?" said Bill. "Who's that?" "A guy named Ralph," Dorf replied. "Town crazy." Ned laughed. "Well, hey, no crazy people around here." Dorf poked him in the chest with his index finger. "I told you to sit on it, Tonto. Now I got word that Ralph was peddling out this way, spouting his gospel." "We haven't seen anybody here, officer," said Bill.
"Just us,"
Marcy added.
This guy Ralph,"
said Brenda.
"is he dangerous?"
She was thinking about the figure she thought she'd seen back at the lake, watching. "Every time that loony gets drunk," said Dorf, "he gets his calling. I end up spending the morning in court, and he gets a week in jail." The speaker mounted on the handlebars of the motorcycle crackled as the dispatcher's voice came over the radio.
Cycle 2, where are you? Come in, Cycle 2.
Jack picked up the mic, but Dorf instantly snatched it from him and pushed him back, giving him a stern look. "This is Dorf. I'm out here at Camp Crystal Lake, over."
"Well, get back in, Dorf,"
the radio blasted.
"Sheriff wants you back in town on the double."
"Roger that," said Dorf into the mic. "That's a 10-4 on my way out." He turned to the group. "Never keep the sheriff waiting." He hitched up his pistol belt. "You kids keep your noses clean, you understand? You'll be hearing from me if you don't." He made eye contact with each of them. "We ain't gonna stand for no weirdness out here." He nodded for emphasis. He put his shades back on, threw his leg over the bike, and punched the electric starter. The Harley rumbled to life, and he blipped the throttle several times, staring at them through his mirrored shades. He wished he could pull a donut, locking up the front brake and shifting into gear, giving a lot of throttle so the rear wheel would slide around in a 180. But the last time he'd tried that, he had dropped the bike on its side in front of Harlan's hardware store, and he had to ask Harlan to come out and help him pick it up. He still hadn't heard the end of that one. He carefully eased the bike around over the ruts and gave it some gas. The rear wheel spun in the dirt, and he almost lost it, but he managed to save himself at the last instant, and he shot off down the road. They laughed as they watched Dorf ride off into the sunset. Ned walked back toward the cabin in an exaggerated version of John Wayne's rolling gait, and Jack tossed off a salute at Dorf's back. Marcy and Brenda shook their heads and went back into the cabin. Alice had missed the show. She came in from the storage shed with a sack of pots and pans so they could start on dinner. She set them down on the table and went into the back room, the pantry. She opened the door and jumped back with a scream as Ralph stepped out, leering at her insanely.
"I'm a messenger of God,"
he cried, coming at her with his hand raised. She backed up against the stove as Marcy and Ned came running in, hearing her scream. They pulled up short at the sight of Ralph, standing like an animated scarecrow and staring wildly at them.
"You're doomed if you stay here,"
Ralph said.
"This place is cursed. Cursed!"
Ned and Marcy glanced at each other uneasily.
"It's got a death curse,"
Ralph said, his eyes wide.
"Who are you?"
Alice asked, staying well out of his reach.
"What do you want?"
said Marcy, moving behind Ned.
"God sent me,"
Ralph answered. "Get out of here, man." Ned hoped he didn't sound as frightened as he felt.
"I got to warn you,"
Ralph said, moving toward them. Ned sidled away from the door, giving him a clear path and hoping he would take it. Ralph stared at each of them, his eyes bulging.
"You're doomed if you stay. Go! Go!"
He suddenly lurched past Ned and went out the cabin door, hurrying away without a backward look. Ned watched him go, then took a deep breath. "I think we just met Ralph,"
God,
said Alice, putting her hand to her forehead.
what's next?
She looked out the door and saw Ralph approaching on his rickety old bicycle.
"You're all doomed,"
He shouted at them as he pedaled down the same road Dorf had taken moments ago.
"You're all doomed."